Three, two, one. Welcome to Truth's Table and Friends 7 Last Words of Jesus. I'm Nicole Martin, and I'm a friend of the table, but most importantly, I'm a friend of Jesus. When Jesus speaks, we listen. Hear now the words of John 19, verse 28. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. I just want to share from the topic, stay thirsty, friends. He had been hanging on the cross for several hours, and now Jesus declared his thirst. But he was more than just thirsty. Jesus was dehydrated. Dehydration is what happens when your body loses more water than it takes in. From the tears shed in the garden, to the blood and water lost in the beatings, to the sweat that dripped from his brow, Jesus' body had given out more than he could possibly take in. He was fully God and fully man, and in this moment, Jesus spoke of his thirst. On the one hand, this statement comes as perhaps the most human statement of them all. I'm thirsty. The reality of his dehydrated body was so real that no one could deny this fact. His physical thirst was so obvious that the soldiers tried to give him what they drank, because they figured when you're thirsty, anything will do. Yet on the other hand, this statement is also extraordinarily divine, hinting at a thirst that goes deeper than the flesh and reaches into the soul. Yes, Jesus' thirst was critical in so many ways. And in this invitation of a Good Friday, Jesus invites us to come closer, to hear and smell and taste and understand this thirst. Because at the core of the invitation of the words of Jesus is an invitation to embrace what it means to suffer as Jesus suffered. And in this invitation, in these words, Jesus invites us to learn what it means to live thirsty. To live thirsty is to live with a level of desperation and desire that only God can quench. To live thirsty is to live with an urgency for God's kingdom to come and God's will to be done. To live thirsty is to live like Jesus. Because this statement on the cross teaches us that you cannot be a disciple and not have thirst. But I wonder sometimes if maybe we've forgotten our thirst. Surrounded by creature comforts and lulled by our own religiosity, I wonder sometimes if we've lost our thirst. Like the soldiers who sat in the heat of the day drinking sour wine which made them only more thirsty, I wonder if we've taught ourselves to drink from fountains that do not satisfy. I wonder if we've sold ourselves into the rhetoric that urges us to obey our thirst, all the while lulling us into this sugary, syrupy, sweet coma of sin. We've lost our thirst perhaps when we don't care about the number of young adults who leave the faith. We've lost our thirst when the pain of the world doesn't seem to bother us. We've lost our thirst when our own sins and the sins of those around us don't grieve us. We've lost our thirst when the injustices of our nation don't make us sorrowful. And when believers lose their thirst, they cease to be salt and light in the world. When the church loses her thirst, she cannot bear witness of God's truth in the world. When nations lose their thirst, they fail to show compassion, the compassion of Christ for those most vulnerable. And when you and I lose our thirst for God, we risk losing our very souls. So how can we cling to the cross and learn to live thirsty? How can we become more like Christ by thirsting in significant ways? Well, I want to suggest that you can live thirsty when you stay in touch with the dry places. For some, the dry places are right where you live. You may be experiencing dry spells in your marriage, dry spells with your friends, dry spells in your relationship with God. For some, the dry places are in your neighborhood. There are dry spells of youth needing mentors, dry spells of victims needing safety, dry spells of poverty and loss. And still for some, the dry places are in the world around you. Dry spells in urban cities, or dry spells in foreign countries, or even dry spells in the church. But rather than running from the dry spells, Jesus ran to them. He ran to them when he descended from heaven to be born on earth. Jesus ran to the dry spaces when he hung around synagogues teaching truth to the wise. Jesus did not flee the dry places. He ran to them when he spoke to the women, when he healed the broken, and when he raised the dead. And because Jesus stayed in touch with the dry spaces, you and I have a chance to be touched by the only one who can quench our thirst. And so I say to you, stay thirsty, my friends. Stay thirsty for the ways and the will of God. Stay thirsty for the heartbeat of the Lord. Stay thirsty for God's truth. Stay thirsty for salvation. Stay thirsty for God's wisdom. And when the dryness of this land attempts to steal and suck dry our hope, stay thirsty for the cross, knowing that he who died for us promised that when we go to him, we will never thirst again. Let's stay thirsty for Christ. God bless you.